Thank you for joining the Secure the Perimeter podcast. Today we have with us a legend in our community, a staple, Mr. Bob Archer. And today's episode is different than normal episodes because we have been blessed to have a man like Bob in our community, and we're here to talk about his story and capture his story and his journey in entrepreneurship at both Kent Water Sports and many other companies he's owned. A little bit of information about Bob. Bob Archer started his first company, Kent Water Sports, in 1981. And if most of you who watched this episode remember, 1981, the interest rates were through the roof. And so we're here to talk about his journey and how he started his company and the obstacles and the abstracts that he had facing himself in the startup of Kent Water Sports in an economy full of so much high interest rates. So also, Bob is a member of many boards. He is a chairperson at our company, senior chairperson at our company at Smart Digital. He's also a board member of the Ashbrook board. He's also on the Ashland University board.
Correct.
And a lifetime member of the YMCA. And here among us, we are in the environment of the Ashland Theater, where Bob was instrumental in helping the theater with their renovation project a few years ago. We're very grateful for that, and as well as many other things in our community. Bob and his wife Jan were instrumental in assisting the YMCA in their expansion, Ashland University. They've been very generous in their gifts to the Ashland schools and many other places around our community. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. Bob, thank you for joining us on our podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Of course you are. Bob's always very enthusiastic, which is one of the attributes I like the most about him. So Bob, we're going to talk about different aspects of your journey, and we're going to go from the initial rollout of Kent Water Sports, and we're going to talk about some of the obstacles and things you faced, and then we're going to talk about strategies that you've used along the way, along your journey in business, and what made you successful, and different things that that you did in the journey of your business and how you grew it, and ways that you achieved, defeat and failure and got through all those things. Then we're going to talk about different levels of growth, and finally we're going to talk about the legacy that you're leaving behind as you've exited your businesses at the ripe young age at 88, which is absolutely amazing. So this is a message to all you young entrepreneurs who think you're going to grow a business fast and make millions of dollars and exit in a year or two. This guy's got you beat by many years. So yeah, what an achievement. So anyway, what inspired you to start Kent Water Sports, Bob?
Well, before I answer that question, let's go back. When I was 6 years old, my grandfather bought me a Roadmaster bicycle. By the time I was in the third grade, I was delivering papers at night. But in the fourth grade, I was delivering papers in the morning. By the time I was in the sixth grade, my grandfather owned a Sunoco gas station. And he would work all kind of hours, but once in a while, by the time I got to be in the eighth grade, he'd take a vacation, let me run the place. And back in those days, he didn't need me. He had a .38 revolver, and he taught me how to use it. And he said, Bobby, when you take this money home at night after a day's work, it was all cash then. He said, somebody comes up to you, I want you to shoot him. Now, nobody ever did that, but that's the way he worked. But anyway, he taught me double entry accounting. And then from there, I started working at a clay plant. I lied about my age. Instead of being 16, I was 15, and learned to work hard. And for example, I was on second shift in the union, sort of gave me a hard time because I was producing too much. And that's when I learned to hate unions, because hey, as an individual, you should be allowed to do what you want to do, okay?
Sure, yeah.
So I got by that, and then next thing you know, they put me on first shift after second shift. And because of my work ethic, the guys would always get paid on Thursday. And these guys that loaded trucks and unloaded kills were hard-nosed guys and big drinkers. So they weren't there on too many Fridays. So Bob Archer got the break to help unload kills or unload trucks on Fridays. Well, next thing you know, because guys took vacation this summer and drinking and so forth, I started to work 4 or 5 days a week. I'd come in at 6 in the morning and draw a kill, 150 degrees. You go in there with leather gloves and leather on the front with a wheel. I learned to run. I can still run wheelbarrow really well because I learned. So we draw those kills, and then again, because guys in the loading crew would screw up, they'd keep me over to load trucks. So I'd start at 6 and be done at 2. And back then, made $25 a day, and that was a lot of money, a lot. And I saved it away, and of course, I was valedictorian of my high school class, and I applied for scholarships at Miami University. I was a football quarterback. I was good, but I wasn't great. Aaron Parseghi was there, and I said, I turned that down. Kenyon, I had a scholarship offer there. I really wanted to go to Case, so I had applied. Never heard a thing. March 1st, 1953. Got a letter in the mail. Dear Mr. Archer, we are pleased to tell you you have received the Union Carbide Scholarship. Full tuition, all your instruments, all your books, room and board is on my own. So that was the break of my life. If I didn't get that scholarship, I wouldn't be here today. It's that simple.
Wow.
So I went to Case, and the first thing I did is get a job in the cafeteria because my parents didn't have any money. So I worked in the cafeteria, and then I got other jobs. And some of my older fraternity brothers, they were watchmen at some of the companies in Cleveland. Watchmen meant on Saturday and Sunday, nobody ever bothered anything back in those days, so you'd sit there and study. So every time one of those guys couldn't go, and I probably worked every other Saturday, I'd go in at like 8 o'clock and work to 4 and make, maybe $8, $9, which was pretty good back then. Sure. So I got a Case and decided then to work for the Hoover Company. Started out in quality control. And next thing you know, I was in charge of purchasing, materials management, warehousing. I became operations manager. They sent me to St. Louis, run a company out there. They wanted to send me to Mississippi. I wouldn't go to Mississippi because back in the 70s, Mississippi was a problem.
Sure.
Big problem. And my family was not going to be involved in all that integration crap. So then left the Hoover Company and went to work for White Motors, building trucks. Got involved a little bit of sales. And then some of my people at Brown Group owned Kent Sporting Goods. And so Brown Group called me and said, hey, Bob, we got a job in Ashland if you're interested. So I talked to them a little bit. I'm not interested. Well, they kept after me. So finally, 1973, I joined Eagle and Kent. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, a lot of companies were out acquiring. Well, by the end of 1980, remember Reagan became president. Volper was the chairman of the Reserve Board, and we were in a deep recession, and inflation was bad. So we decided that we'd make an offer to Brown Group and buy Kent Water Sports. And back then it was called Kent Sporting Goods. And we went to the bank, and all the banks turned us down. So finally, Ike Stage was the chairman or the president of local Huntington Bank. He said, we're going down to Columbus and talk to these people with us. So we went down, and back then, no PowerPoint. You had blue mimeograph sheets. So we went down there and made our pitch, and about 3 o'clock, Frank Vopes, who was chairman of the board, he says, well, we'll take this under advisement. I said, wait. Ike said, wait, we got to make a decision. So I said, well, Mr. Volpe, I've got one more thing to talk about. In New London, the village fathers, they had a thing they called UDAG. And it was like Community Investment Corporation. Like, what's that thing that you guys...
CIC.
No, not TIC, but it doesn't matter. So I said, the village fathers did not want to lose Kent Water Sport, back Kent Sporting Goods. And another company called Eero out of Chicago was also trying to buy it from Brown Group. He says, we want to keep this, and so to keep it, we're going to give this group of people, me heading, there were six of us, said that we will give you this, we get this loan called UDAG, Urban Development and Agriculture. Now it's SBA.
Nice, wow.
So they got $600,000 for us, 20-year note, and it was 6%. So then Frank Volpe says, okay, based on that, we're going to give you $1.5 million credit line. We're going to take a chance on you. You better deliver, young man. And there were the other 6 players said, oh, you guys, you better support this guy.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, well, what's the rate? He said, okay, we're going to give you prime plus 3. Well, that's wonderful. What's prime then? What do you think prime was then?
18%.
18%. So I had to give personal guarantees for my car, my wife, my kids, everything I owned. And of course, if we don't make it, again, I'm not here today.
Yeah.
So I go home and tell my wife. My wife says, she says, Bob, you're crazy. What are you doing? You're mortgaging our future. So you do something like that, you got a lot of motivation. So we go into the place and we find lots of ways to do things. And of course, back then, anything that made money, we found a way to embrace it. And slowly but surely, we dug out of the hole. My sales VP had problems with his wife. They got divorced, so he left. So I had to take over sales as well as being the president. And I did a lot of traveling, met a lot of people, and that's how it started.
Sure. So this is
now back to your question.
So this is 1981, right? So, that's you initially out of the gate. So you're in a sense, I always describe it as staring down the barrel of a loaded gun because you're borrowing money at such high interest rates, right? So that's obviously one of the largest challenges for you out of the gate. How did you overcome that?
Well, first, let's go back a little bit. In 1983, we made our first acquisition. And through
2 years later.
83 to 2021 we made 37 acquisitions. Some very small, some very large. In 1988, one of our competitors, Black Sheep out of Dallas, Texas, we had known each other and they weren't doing very well. And they called and said, Bob, they were owned by another holding company out of St. Louis. And said, we want to sell the company. Would you be interested? I said, well, let me come down and do some due diligence. So I fly a plane down to Dallas, take American Eagle out to Tyler, and I walk in, I look around, wow, these people are so inefficient, it's pathetic. They've just not invested any money in presses and different things they should. By the time I walked around, I said, wow, this is an opportunity. So I made them an offer of $3 million, and they jumped all over it. The place was, today that company is producing over $100 million a year, just manufacturing. It's a great company.
Amazing.
So bottom of press, did all the things that had to be done. And as I said, that was the first really, I've made a lot of small acquisitions. This was a big one. And that started everything going. Then because of our ability to make life vests, people that did water skiing, there wasn't no wakeboarding back then, they came to me and said, gee, we're interested in buying some vests from you. So next thing I know, these guys all worked at Boeing. They learned about fiberglass technology. And one by one, every time they get $100,000 in their pocket, they blow it on something. So I said, look, guys, here, let me make all your life vests for you. You're all on the West Coast. They were buying from America's Cup. America's Cup was a big company back then. Bob Harr was the president of the company, and Gaylord Wallace was the manufacturing guy. Well, Bob was one of these guys that wore a blue blazer with gold buttons, white pants, and Sperry topsiders. And he got to be pretty full of himself, and they lost control of the business. So I went to all these ski companies and said, hey guys, you're buying from America's Cup. They send your vest up to Seattle, where they were all in Linwood and different places. And I said, I can make these vests for you in Ohio, and instead of you shipping everything from the Rockies over, everything from the Rockies east, I'll manufacture and drop ship for you. Save $1 a vest. So one by one, I got all these companies. They were buying from me. And then one by one, they got in trouble, and one by one, I bought each one of them. So that's how I got into the other side of the business.
But your strategy for that was to save them money on drop shipping the vest, which saved them $1 a vest.
Right. Back then, it was almost $1 a vest because freight was big time from all the way from Seattle.
Sure, as it is today.
So what I'd do is everything they needed west of the Rockies, I'd ship to them, pay the freight, and then they'd drop ship on the West Coast. But most of their business was east of the Rockies.
Sure.
So I had it made.
So how did you then offset that cost, Bob, and transfer that to retaining your margin, your operating profit?
Well, we became the low-cost manufacturer because I was a nut on. Because remember, my background was manufacturing. We fight every way we could. The other thing was,
Sure.
we bought a lot of material. I bought from a company in South Carolina. And every August, September, the guy from the New York office would come in. His name was Tom. And he'd say, Bobby, I've got an early Christmas present for you. And they'd always have to close out a bunch of fabric. So I'd buy all kinds of fabric that usually would go for $3, $4 a yard. I'd get it for 75 cents to $1.25. And I'd buy it up. And of course, then in the spring, I didn't have, and they'd hold it for me until I needed it.
Yeah.
So again, labor-wise, we went over everything. We put new standards in. We had an incentive system that people got paid by the piece, not by the hour. And we were the low-cost manufacturer. Nobody really could compete with us. And one by one, the guys in the low end, they went out. I remember a company called Milco in New York. Old Howard Mitko says, Bob, you'll never beat me. Well, I kept having lower costs, so finally he sold out to me. And that was an acquisition on the other side. But as I said, we bought 35 companies, and it worked. And we grew organically as well as by acquisition.
Sure. So you grew both ways. So it sounds to me like early on, you had the manufacturing piece down because that's your background.
Right.
You had a background in manufacturing. And so quickly when you went into these companies and you saw the way that they operated, you were already picking apart the way that they operated and the way that you could streamline it and make it more efficient.
Right.
So what were besides the interest rates, Bob, what were some of the challenges right out of the gate that you had to navigate through and make decisions about how to get through those?
As I said, just we go in and start the company, organize things, get it done. One thing I'll go back to when I bought Black Sheep out of Texas. When every company I bought, I'd like to keep the management if they made sense, but I always give them a chance. Well, Black Sheep, the manufacturing people in Tyler were pretty good people. The sales and admin people in Fort Worth were not. Larry West was the vice president of sales. And when I did my due diligence, they had, just before I bought Black Sheep, they had taken away one of the Kmart, the West Coast from me, which I couldn't believe this happened. Because the buyer says, gee, Bob, they're got a lower price than you. I said, there's no way. So when I'm doing my due diligence, I see the price that Larry's selling to Kmart on the West Coast. The idiot was selling below his cost. So then Larry says, well, Bob, he says, I've been in charge of sales. What do you want me to do? I said, Larry, I got news for you. I've done my due diligence. I know what you did. You need to find a new job because I don't want you on my team. That was the only guy I dismissed because the guy was an idiot. He said, well, Bob, sales are what's it all about. Wait a minute, Larry. There's a top line and there's a bottom line, and you've totally ignored the bottom. So sayonara, my friend.
Sure.
That's what you got to do.
So that's obviously big. That's a big thing because these are big companies you're selling to, right? So
Right.
You missed the bottom line, which could potentially cost you millions and millions of dollars.
As you well know, I'm a nut on margins.
You're a nut on margins.
If you don't get
yes.
margin, forget it.
That's right.
Then you got to still control expense, but
Sure.
margin is what it's all about.
Sure. Yeah, because you have to operate. You have to have cash
Right.
to operate out of.
Okay.
So in your journey, Bob, when you guys are up and running now, you're making acquisitions and you're getting through, you're through the startup phase. Now you're into viability and you're now running a company and it's moving along. What were some of the key components to some of your initial breakthroughs?
Well, you can't have a breakthrough until you have good people. And even when I was at Hoover, I always had the ability to pick good people. You look at their background, you talk to them. Over the years, I probably made 4 or 5 mistakes, but I made a lot of good decisions. And John Clark was my CFO forever. Guys out in the West Coast. I had a guy named C.J. Vlahovic in 1994. He was in customer service. Then he became customer service manager, became sales manager, vice president of sales. Today, he's president of the HO division. And I've got other stories I could tell just like that. You hire good people and you bring them up.
Sure.
And then every once in a while you get a guy that say, hey, it's not working out here. You need to find another job that's more suitable for it. And I would not embarrass people to say, hey, it's not working out.
Sure.
A couple of times I had to fire a couple of guys because they had a problem with booze. You can't drink on the job.
Sure. Yeah.
No.
Absolutely. And obviously back in the 80s, during the hype of the manufacturing days, that seemed to be pretty popular in that day.
That's
Guys would
right.
go out to the parking lot and drink in the parking lot.
That's right, exactly.
I've heard a lot of stories from my own dad, working in factories.
Yeah.
So that was a thing. And obviously interest rates and stress levels were through the roof. So talk to me about your decision-making strategy, Bob. Anytime you go into an organization and analyze an organization, what are some of the things that you look at the most, that you're most focused on in any organization?
In terms of buying one or running one, or both?
Both.
Well, again, we've talked about due diligence. I've always prided myself going into a company, examining their books, looking at what they were doing, and finding out what it was all about. I've said some of my friends have made bad decisions on because they didn't do due diligence. There was a company here in Ashland, I think I might have told you about this once. It was a $12 million company, and they paid too much for it because they found out when they went in and really looked at the inventory, which they hadn't looked at, it was old, and they couldn't sell it. So they lost their shirts. Due diligence means you go in and evaluate everything, what the inventory is, what the payables are, what the receivables are, and what the talent level is.
Sure.
And I was very thorough with those things.
Sure.
So I only had one acquisition that really didn't pan out. It was in South Carolina. And a guy on the West Coast wanted to buy the business, and he wanted to give me a haircut, which he did. But I was shocked because the building I owned was in a place that a guy came in and says, I want this building bad. He paid me more for the building than it was worth, and I ended up making money where I thought I was going to lose money.
Sure.
So that was luck. That wasn't skill.
Yeah.
That was I never realized the property was so valuable. But this guy thought it was, so he paid me the money, so I walked away.
Sure. Yeah. So as I'm going through my questions, scaling and innovation. We've talked a lot about vertical integration
And relentless innovation.
Relentless innovation.
Right.
When you're talking about vertical integration, and I know we've talked about this quite a bit.
Right. Yes, we have.
You've taught me a lot about vertical integration and why it's so critical. But is that the one thing that you would say is the most responsible for growing most organizations is innovation, vertical integration?
I believe so. There are some exceptions, but anything that you can make yourself, because whoever you're buying something from, they have to make a profit.
Sure.
So why shouldn't you make that profit?
Sure.
And again, what we did is, we started out, we were buying a lot of things, but by the time, let's say mid '90s, everything we could make, we did ourselves.
Sure.
We did it ourselves. Right?
So we've always said that we hire for character and train for skill.
Okay.
But
Good.
what's your approach to hiring good people, Bob?
Well, again, the interview. You got to look at their background. Of course, the problem is if you call, and when this whole thing of you got to be careful with how you ask questions about people, because you're not allowed to say anything bad anymore because you get sued.
Sure.
So my final question would be, if I were hiring a guy and he gave me references, and one of them was his former boss, I'd call the boss and say, hey, what do you think of this guy? Oh, no. Would you rehire him? Sometimes they said no. That was all I needed. I wouldn't hire the guy. Because if they won't rehire him, there's a problem.
Sure.
That's how I did it.
Sure.
But again, now the interview, and I was always a nut. Some people have 4-page resumes. Forget it. If you can't put your skills on one page, you're not doing a good job.
Sure. So throughout your journey, you have seen a lot of innovation in all the years that you've been in business, Bob, and you own, up to the point of you retiring, you own 9 companies. Right. So you've got a lot of experience with a lot of businesses, and you've got a presence, your company's had a presence all over the country, right?
In the world.
All over the world.
All over the world. Right? We sell a lot to Europe, South America,
Sure.
Australia. Europe's our biggest market.
Sure.
China is growing a little bit, not much though,
Sure.
because they have rancid water.
Sure. So if we could take a pause for a second, I would encourage all of you entrepreneurs, and I've said this in past podcasts, find a mentor, because and the mentor, you have to choose your mentors wisely. Patrick Bet-David wrote a book about choose your enemies wisely. I say choose your mentors wisely, because what you don't want to do, it's important to know what to do in life, but it's also just as important to know what not to do. And what you don't want to do is take advice from bad mentors, people that don't have proven track records and results. You got to have results. And so going back to you, Bob, you've had a lot of results throughout the years, and you tried to make as few of mistakes as possible.
Right.
It's a very keen sense of strategy on the battlefield as well.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people that come into businesses with experience, you had a lot of great experience in manufacturing, and that gave you an edge over the next guy trying to start a company, right? I think it's just as equally important for, military guys that get out of the military and start businesses as well. A lot of people say, well, they don't have the advantage because they don't have any college education, but it sounds like you came from nothing. Your parents didn't have a lot of money, and you got through school with scholarships. So where do you see businesses, and I know you've seen a lot of innovation throughout the years, Bob, where do you see businesses in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, of course, now we have to cope with AI and robotic stuff, and it's a whole new, brave new world. And that's the thing. If you start looking at the last 100 years, each 10 years, things go faster and further. And kids today have to go to college and learn a lot of different things because the world of manufacturing and retail and business is changing rapidly.
Sure.
And the competition's changing a lot. Back to one point about young people and entrepreneurs. I've always said to young people, hey, number one, when you're out interviewing for a job, try to find a company where you're going to be happy. If you're not happy in a job, it's not a job. And so look for the right company where you can fit in with your skills. And then number two, carefully evaluate your first boss, because he's going to be your mentor, okay? And don't work for a jerk. You've heard me say that before. Mm-hmm. If you get a bad boss, it's going to hurt your career. Sure. So find a good boss. And I always prided myself working with people to help them grow. And I always said, hey, I want you to take my place.
Sure.
And a few people did.
So you would encourage your employees to replace you eventually?
That's right, exactly right, yes.
And I've heard that, and I've read that in a lot of books.
Right.
A lot of good business books say the same thing. Always encourage your employees to take your position.
Yep.
So, and I've also learned a lot of things, in the few short years that I've been in business, that people will not stay at a company that they can't see vision or growth.
They won't stay, right? They'll look for something else,
sure.
Right? And money is not always the big thing. Money's important, but people, if they get satisfaction, they feel they're contributing, they're going to stay.
Sure.
And then when there is no room for advancement, they'll look someplace, but then you've trained them to get a better job someplace else, and that's okay too.
Sure.
In my business, what I found is where I like turnover, R&D is a good place to have turnover because you get fresh new ideas. Graphics, a good graphics guy is good for 4, 5, 6 years. Turn them over and bring in guys with new, fresh ideas, and there's all kind of room for graphics for people to move around, so that works out okay.
So Bob, if we were to go back to a younger version of yourself, before you grew your organizations to the level that you did before you retired, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, I was always pretty self-confident because, I came from nowhere, and in order to survive, I had to believe in myself and work hard. And I think probably one of the things when I was younger, I wasn't as patient as I could have been. But on the other hand, you got to be impatient to get results. So there's a fine line between impatience and patience.
Sure.
There really is.
There really is. Yeah.
If you're too laid back, you can't get anything done. And you got to be careful. I always found sometimes I was maybe too hard on people. When you got them down, pick them back up, and pat them on the back, and say, hey, let's move on.
Sure.
But every once in a while, I would be, if I had a guy that wasn't getting the job done, some people you got to treat with kid gloves. Other people you got to kick them in the pants. It just depends on the personality.
Sure.
And I think as a good boss, you have to recognize who is what and how you motivate them.
Sure.
And different people take different ways to motivate.
Well, and clearly you were good at doing that, right?
I had fun doing that.
You got a lot of fun. And I got to say, Bob, one of the things that I enjoy the most about you is you're always positive about everything. You know, you try to be as positive and encouraging and uplifting as possible.
I always told you, when you walk into your office in the morning or you walk into a meeting, if you walk in gloom and doom, everybody picks up on that.
Yep.
So I believe, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Let's go.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
get things done today. So everybody picks up on that.
Sure.
It's like when you're playing sports. You know, if you go out there and you're a gloom and doom guy, that's not good leadership.
Sure.
Good leaders find a way to motivate people.
Yeah, sure.
Right. I think I've told you before, a good leader, you have to manage, okay? You have to be a teacher.
That's right.
You have to be a coach. Coaching and teaching are different. But finally, you've got to be a cheerleader. If you're not a cheerleader, forget it. It's not going to work.
I like it. So in the military, I learned as a young NCO, non-commissioned officer, that there was a big difference between a boss and a leader. A boss is a guy, to me, who sits behind a desk with a placard on his desk, and that placard gives him position.
Right.
But a leader gets in front of that placard and he leads his team and encourages his team and is in the trenches with his team. Learned that very fast.
And he takes it from good to great.
And he takes it from good to great.
Right.
That's right, which is also a good book.
Yep.
Jim Collins.
Jim Collins.
So we've talked about the innovation. We've talked about some of your strategies, Bob. Talk to me about, you know, in these organizations that you've grown, what levels did you set the KPIs, as we call them today, key performance indicators, about milestones that you wanted to hit along the way, or was it just you had a growth strategy?
No, we always set goals. We had budgets. We always had two budgets, one for where we wanted to go and one for the bank.
Sure.
You always got to be a little more conservative with the bank. But with my sales guys, I said, here's your goal, and you got to get there.
Sure.
And if they did, that was fine, then the bank was all excited. And
Sure.
sometimes if we didn't quite get where we wanted to, we still beat the bank.
Sure.
And the bank, you got to keep the banks happy. You know
Sure.
that.
Sure.
You got that.
So listen, I want to again pause here for a second, and I want to point out Bob is leaking information for anybody looking for information on how to grow a business, how to start a business, some of the key components and principles that requires success in any business. You really go back and review this video because there's a lot of information that he's given away for free. I mean, this obviously the information's just flowing from him about things that he's used for himself along the way, which is a catalyst to his own success. So, talking about your legacy, Bob, when you finally retired at the young age of 88.
88 was great.
Talk to me, what was the net worth of Kent Water Sports? What were your sales for Kent Water Sports when you
They were
retired?
approaching 300 million.
300 million, which is absolutely
The first year we
amazing.
were 3
Sure.
3 million.
$3 million.
Way back in
first year,
1981, right?
1981. So from 3 million to 300 plus million dollars. So what legacy would you like to leave behind, both personally and professionally?
Well, I think one thing that we've talked about, you have to have energy and passion for your job, okay? You also have to have discipline. But I think the most important thing I've left with all of my people, at the end of the day, integrity. If you don't have integrity, you got a problem.
Love it.
Because when you commit to do something, you got to go out and do it. When I commit to my people, I'm going to do something, I got to do it. Now,
Sure.
if something comes up that blows out of the water, I mean, like some government thing, then you're going to say, well, I have to change because of this. But I don't ever like to do that.
Sure.
When I commit, when we say we're going to give a bonus, we're going to give a raise, or we're going to buy this company, we're going to do that, you got to go do it.
Sure.
When I tell my wife I'm going to the store, I got to go do it.
You got to go do it. You got
That's
to
right.
execute.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, we always talk about executing.
Right.
So it's amazing, Bob, because as I've come to know you, I've realized you do exactly what a lot of things that the Bible talks about. You know, Christ talks about, giving himself away and giving yourself away to help other people. And you've done that a lot in your life. You've literally given millions and millions and millions of dollars away to people and organizations that you believed in, which has been instrumental in the education
Right.
sector, for Ashland University here locally, for our own community. This very theater we're sitting in now, or there are other organizations around. And so to me, some of the value that I see you leaving and your legacy is,
Right.
it's great to accumulate all these things, but you're at the period of your life where you're giving it all away. So talk to me about your philanthropy.
Well, I'll start this way. God helps those who help themselves. And I think we're all put on this earth to do something, okay? And I see my role is helping people be successful. And like we give scholarships, give these young kids today a way to realize their potential. To me, that's very important. And if I do that, then I've satisfied God.
Sure.
Because that's my mission.
Sure. And I love that, Bob, because to me, it sounds like you've gone back to your own grassroots. When you were a kid, you want to give these other kids the fighting chance that maybe
Right.
you did or didn't have,
Exactly
right?
That's right, yeah.
And so I think that's very important.
Yeah.
So it's very encouraging, not just from a local business owner like myself, to see people like you, because I'm always aspired and inspired by people like you, because it reminds all of us that you can grow to unlimited levels if you just have the passion and the drive to go through it. Sean Mannion and I had a podcast last week, and we talked about his journey and how he grew his own business and the differences that people have with freedom, right? Financial freedom.
Right.
To me, ultimately, financial freedom is being debt-free, but having enough wherewithal to, be sustainable in your own business and in your own life. So, a lot of valuable insight that we gained, Bob. But again, I think it's critical that we capture your story because of the things that you've accomplished in your own life and the amount of years that you've been at it. It's very inspiring. A lot of people, break off and retire at 65, and you plowed right through that, went on to 88 years old. So it's amazing.
As you know, I'm still working for Ashland University.
And you're still working. And you look like you're in great shape. You get around just fine. You
Still walk every day, 7 days a week.
7 days a week. You do very well. So,
Right.
But on behalf of our own organization and a member of our community, I wanted to personally thank you, even on camera, for all of your contributions and the investments that you've made into not only our community but into people, our younger generations. You've given back certainly much more than most people would.
Well, I'd summarize by saying, pursue excellence with passion and integrity. If you do those three things, you're going to get the job done.
Sure.
And treat people the way you'd like to be treated.
Which is biblical, right?
Right, exactly.
Very good.
Right.
Well, Bob, we appreciate you. It's been great to talk to you and learn a lot more about your grassroots and your baseline of how you started and where you started and when you started, all the way through to retiring and still being involved in lots of things. You're definitely an encouragement, and we're grateful for you and your wife, Jan. And we're definitely grateful for the lessons that Bob's given you guys today. Again, if you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to, make a decision about whether you want to start your own business and grow your own organization, there's a plethora of information you're going to gain by today's podcast. So stay tuned for the next Secure the Perimeter podcast, where we'll have a lineup of more great entrepreneurs and hear more about their stories. So
It's been an enjoyable morning. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Bob. All right. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining Secure the Perimeter podcast.